going to start today's lecture with a brief clip. And as you can see by your handouts, it is spooky time. It's yesterday was Halloween, and so I thought it would be appropriate for today to learn about the Jewish take on demons, ghouls, monsters, the devil, those kinds of things. I thought it might be fun for today. So we're going to start with just a really quick clip, just to get us in the mood. All right. So sorry, the dramatic beginning, it wasn't quite as dramatic. You know me with the tech stuff. Okay, so that was real quick. You can turn the lights back on. We're going to come back to it. That was it. I gave you the beginning of it, but we're going to come back to that. That, of course, is a clip from the very famous Yiddish play, The Dybbuk, and it was made into a movie in Poland in 1938. And we're going to be talking about that, but I just thought it would kind of set the mood with the scariness to talk about the Dybbuk. But before we get into the Dybbuk, let's start at the top. When we think of scary monsters, evil in the world, what do we think of first? Ghosts. Well, that's one. Who's the king of all of that stuff? The devil, right? We are going to talk about ghosts later. The devil. So in Judaism, overall, Judaism does not believe in the devil as an actual being, separate being. In Judaism, the devil is thought of as, in Hebrew, the Yetzer Hara, or the evil inclination. And the devil is that aspect of human behavior which leans us towards evil, towards doing the wrong thing. And so we constantly are fighting, people are constantly fighting with that, and we believe, Judaism basic belief is that it's up to people, human beings, to decide whether or not you want to follow the Yetzer Tov, the good inclination, or the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. So, though basic Judaism does not portray the devil as a being, like as Christians do Christian theology, really believes in the devil as a fallen angel of God who deliberately works in opposition to God. In Judaism, the devil is thought of as the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, and the evil inclination still works for God. It's still an aspect of God. God has both good and both bad, and it's up to us as humans to, not that God has good and bad, but good and bad exists in the universe, and it's up to us as humans to determine what our path will be. And sometimes we do things that are evil, and sometimes we do things that are good. Most of the time we try to be good and walk a middle line. So, so anybody know the origins of the root of the name devil? Origins of the name devil, the devil. Anybody know? So devil comes from the Greek word diablos, and diablos actually means a slanderer, a liar. So devil, it's Latin that was derived from diablos, which means slanderer, and that actually goes very much in line with the Jewish view of the devil. Sometimes in Judaism, the devil is also portrayed, and once in the Bible, he's portrayed this way, as a being, as a particular being. Anybody know when that is? in the Torah and the Old Testament? Yeah, well, that was a legend, but that wasn't actually text, biblical text, but that was Midrash Agadah. In the book of Job. Anybody remember the book of Job?
Yeah,
Here,
but
Job
but that's
is.
not in the Old Testament.
Well, it's not in the 5 books of Moses, but it's in the Tanakh,
Okay.
which is the Torah, the prophets, and the writings.
Yeah.
So that kind of makes up the whole Old Testament.
Okay.
So the book of Job, Job is a righteous man. I'm just giving you a little refresher, those of you who might remember. Job is a very righteous man, and he has many blessings. And Satan, who is the agent of God, which Judaism calls the devil, is Satan, and that name Satan actually means comes from the word to mean the prosecutor. The prosecutor, not so much as like the evil one, but the prosecutor. So Satan's job in God's court is to bring to light evil and to encourage evil in the world, because things have to have a balance. As we talked about with Kabbalah last week, things have to have a balance. So Satan goes to God and says, you know what? I bet you that your man Job down there, who's oh so good, wouldn't be so good if he didn't have all the blessings that he's got in his life. He has a nice wife, nice children, a nice home, a nice job. He doesn't really lack for anything. He's got good friends. And God says, all right, well, let's test him and see. And takes away all of the good things that Job has. He loses everything. He loses his family and all his possessions, and he's still faithful to God in the end. And so his good things are restored to him. So that's the one time that in the actual sacred canonical text that Satan is mentioned. And he's also mentioned a little bit, alluded to in some of the prophets, but not in this context of an actual being, more as the evil inclination. Now, in Jewish mythology, Satan is thought of as like I said, as the persecutor. So when you pass away and you go up to heaven, and it's being determined whether or not you are going to enter heaven or go to what Jews believe is kind of that middle ground. It's not quite hell, but it's called Gehenna, which is a space where you're not in heaven, so you're kind of in between places, and you have to find your way to earn your place in heaven. Satan is the one who will call you to task on all the things that you did in your lifetime. So he's the prosecutor. So for those of you who are attorneys, I'm sorry. I think that's where a lot of that comes from. So listen, my daughter's an attorney. She's not Satan. She's wonderful. But anyway, that's how Satan is thought of. Any questions about Satan or the devil? Because then I'm going to move on to demons, which are much more interesting in Jewish folklore. Any questions about that? Okay. So demons. In Judaism, are Jews supposed to be allowed to believe in magic, sorcery, demons like that? Anybody know? I see heads shaking.
Yes, because there are exorcisms of demons.
There are exorcisms of demons, but you're absolutely right. But I will tell you that in the Bible, it explicitly says, I'm going to read to you from the Bible very briefly. In Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 10, it says, "Let no one be found among you who consigns his son or daughter to the fire, or who is an augur, a soothsayer, a diviner, a sorcerer, one who casts spells, or one who consults ghosts or familiar spirits, or one who inquires of the dead. For anyone who does such things is abhorrent to the Lord, And it's because of these abhorred things that the Lord your God is dispossessing them before you. So right here, Deuteronomy, God says, no magic.
I was told, when I asked the question to a rabbi,
Can you speak up a
I
little?
apologize. When I asked the question of a couple of rabbis, can you like pray to somebody that died, your mother, whatever it is, to intervene, you know, in your behalf to God? And I said no, because you pray to God, you know, there's no in between.
Right, so, praying, what did you say, exorcisms?
Well, there is, King Saul consulted a witch. So somebody did it, even if he wasn't supposed to.
Yes, King Saul did.
It's
And-
recommended.
And
After he got
it's in
the-
direct opposition, though, to what is the text. Direct instruction. Deuteronomy is all about God's instructions to the Israelites how to be God's people. It seems to be in direct opposition to that, and yet, and I don't know the answer why, and yet so often in so many different legends and stories, demons, ghosts, devils, sorcerers. The Baal Shem Tov, who we learned about a couple weeks ago, he did some sorcery, remember? Yet, it seems to be a theme that is woven throughout Jewish folklore, Jewish cultural traditions, and the midrash that comes from the sacred text. So, why is that? I mean, I don't know. I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist, but I would think that, you know, a common explanation for why people believe in the supernatural is because it provides an explanation for those things we don't understand, right? It's a reason for those things we don't understand, and explains things that might not be otherwise, because how could something be in the logical progression of things? Got a question?
I mean, I agree with you, but on the other hand, then why is it forbidden? That to me is a more interesting question.
That's a very Talmudic way to think about it.
Yeah.
So why is it forbidden? Why would it be forbidden? So there are people who say, well, maybe it's forbidden because there's some merit that there actually is magic in the world.
I just asked a rabbi if there are people that communicate with the dead, and he said yes.
So communicating with the dead is different than praying to the dead.
Right.
You can ask someone who is dead to watch out for someone else or something like that. Although making inquiries of the dead is something different. Maybe that's seances or trying to raise the dead. That's trying to speak to the dead directly rather than you in your heart saying, you know, like,
Help me.
you know, you're up there, please help, look down and make sure that this happens or something like that. I mean, it's human nature, I think, in so many ways. And it might be that there's magic in the world. I mean, I love stories that have a little bit of magic in them, especially the kind that are like real life stories, but there's something a little bit magical that happens in them. And I think that probably a lot of people could tell a story or of something that happened in their own life, which seemed to be a little bit supernatural. Anybody have anything they want to share? Okay.
There was a story in the Staten Island papers, I think it was, about this wonderful boy that died, and this butterfly came in, and it just stayed with them, and stayed with them, and stayed with them. And you hear a lot of stories like that. And you know what the thing is? Do I believe some of it? Yeah, I do. And the reason is because nobody knows.
Nobody knows, that's right. It
Somebody
explains what we
came
don't know.
to a group that I was in and lost her son. And she went to this psychic on Staten Island, and a very intelligent woman. And she said,
Who, the
"Who-"
psychic or the woman who went?
You gotta speak up a little bit, this heat exchange is noisy.
Oh, yeah. I don't know why we need heat, it's 70-something. But she was blown away. The reason I said she's a very intelligent woman, because it's not like just some person. And blown away that this woman knew so many things that she shouldn't have known about her son. She didn't tell her anything. So the point is, do I think that's possible? Yeah, why? Because I don't know.
Yes, we don't know. So, demons. There's mystery in the world. We don't know. So historically, demons, according to the Zohar, there were 3 types of demons. One was similar to the angels, like I just spoke about Satan, kind of the God's angels who work for on the evil inclination side of things. 2 are demons that live on earth, but they're like people. They're very much like people, but they're really not. They're really demons. But they're Jewish. It's in Jewish folklore. They're Jewish. Very serious. They follow the laws of the Torah. They keep kosher. They observe the Sabbath. But yet they're demons, and they wreak some mischief in the world. And then the third kind are just total evil. Total evil. And the roots of these demons, and some of them have names, and we're going to talk about them, go back to the cultures around the Israelite people in ancient times, ancient Sumerian cultures, the Canaanite cultures. All of those ancient cultures were extremely superstitious and had many demonic elements in their theology, and those were influenced in Jewish folkloric demonology. And then later on, during the time of the Babylonian exile, Babylon at that time, Persia, that Babylonian empire was extremely superstitious, and their religions included also many, many demonic elements which influenced Jewish folklore. So, like we said, we don't understand, and these are the roots. And so when people needed explanations for things that went awry or that were difficult for them, calling it the fault of a demon made a lot of sense to people. And particularly, these kinds of things revolve around things we as human beings have trouble controlling. Mainly lust and sexuality, greed, gluttony, what did I write down? Power, and the power to oppress, an oppression, being oppressed, truth and untruth, lying and slandering. These things that as humans we fall prey to. They're very, very difficult sometimes to control. The explanation for losing control would be you were overtaken by a demon, it was the work of a demon. Even things in medieval Jewish households, things as simple as, well, the milk went bad. That was the work of a demon. Not that fact they didn't have refrigerators, but the food spoiled, that was the work of a demon.
Right, exactly.
Somebody got sick, very often sickness was attributed to a demon, that was the work of a demon. Someone fell prey to infidelity, marital infidelity, that was the work of a demon.
Okay. Are you saying that a demon is just an explanation of the evil inclination? Because all the things you're talking about.
No, I'm talking
are
about now,
evil.
not evil inclination. I'm talking about mischief in the world that can't be understood, and temptation which leads people to behave in ways that they shouldn't maybe behave towards the evil inclination, often were attributed to actual mythological, folkloric, superstitious, supernatural beings known as demons. People actually believed and thought, and some still do today, that there are these other living, these other beings in the world which wreak havoc, which are called demons. And they're not human, but they're actual existing things called demons. And so if your milk went bad, or your food spoiled, or your baby unfortunately died, or a mother died in childbirth, this was the work of a demon. Okay? Because it explained, especially in medieval times, things that people could not understand. Mental illness also very, very often thought of as the work of demons, that a person was possessed. If they were mentally ill, they were possessed by a demon.
I heard the expression bad seed. They have a bad seed.
Yeah, that's another idea, that the bad seed idea is that, and that's actually a very complicated idea, but it comes from the idea that we're going to get a little intimate here. Men would be possessed by lust that overtook them. That lust that maybe caused them to not to move more towards the evil inclination was actually a demon possession, which then would mate with their wives or have an adulterous relationship and create an offspring that was a bad seed. And the product of masturbation, male masturbation or nocturnal emissions, was always believed to be taken up by the demons, by Lilith, who we've talked about in this class before, or by some of Lilith's handmaidens, and used in demonic procreation, because demons need human semen to procreate. They can't do it on their own. And that the offspring of demons and humans creates demon children. And there's a whole folkloric body about these demon children, demon offspring, who a man passes away, and all of a sudden at his funeral, who comes but the demon children, who were the offspring of these unions, unholy unions out of matrimony. And those demon offspring would lay claims on the estate, on the inheritance of the father who had passed away. There's all kinds of shtetl, Eastern European, Sephardic stories about that. And in fact, in some cultures, the sons of a man who died were not allowed to go to the cemetery, because it was thought that if they went to the cemetery for their father's funeral, that at the cemetery they would be attacked and invaded by the demon offspring, who were the illegitimate heirs. And so very often, very superstitious Eastern European, and also in Sephardic cultures, would keep the sons away from the cemetery when their father had passed away. I've never heard of that. Has anybody ever heard of that? She said if a woman is pregnant, she should not go to a
Right,
cemetery.
yes.
You weren't
I wasn't
allowed to.
allowed. I wasn't allowed to go.
Okay,
allow my daughter to
many
Yeah,
people
I
have heard
wasn't
that.
allowed.
You're right, that many people were not allowed.
Right.
I was going to say, I'm not permitted my
They
daughter
told me not to go.
to go to my husband's unburial at the cemetery. Definitely.
I think after you come home from a cemetery, you have to wash your hands,
Right.
all right?
Well, you do, but that's not so much tied in with the demons. That more ties in with the ritual, with death rituals. But these are superstitions that have to do with the demonic presence in the world, which, you shouldn't attract or encourage. So I'll read you a little.
What about the
fairy tale.
red ribbon under the carriage and under the crib that we used to put
Well,
on?
those are to keep that's to keep Lilith away. And there are, as we talked about in not this class, but in previous classes, amulets, charms, different things to keep the demons away.
Garlic also to keep the demons away.
What?
Garlic.
Yes, garlic. That goes back to also keeping vampires away, all kinds of things like that. That's funny. She said you can keep everybody away with garlic. That's true. So
Was he a teacher?
all of these kinds of things are tied into Jewish superstitions that we know about. The red strings, amulets, garlic, staying out of the cemetery. All that has to do with a belief in demons. The ayin hara is that evil inclination, and if you give the evil inclination an opening, it opens the doors for the demons to come in. Okay, that's the ayin hara, which means the evil eye. That is Satan who's watching you, and when you allow your evil inclination to be manifest, that opens the door for demons to come in. So if you've done something, if you've done something that's evil, that only breeds more evil. And I think that is probably true. Once you do something that's, wrong, or
You say kanahara to keep them away.
you say kanahara to keep them away. So there's spells, there's charms, there's things like that to keep them away. So the king of all the demons was a character named Asmodeus. Anybody ever hear of him? Asmodeus. Well, if we lived in the Middle Ages, you probably would have heard of him because he is thought of as the king of all the demons. Now, you would think if he's the king of all the demons, that he's a particularly nefarious kind of guy, but he's not actually. He's a guy who is wise, he makes a lot of sense, and in fact, he became King Solomon's muse. The folklore tradition tells us King Solomon and Asmodeus were actually very tight. And that Solomon learned a lot from Asmodeus. In the folklore, I'll give you an example. The Bible says that when Solomon built the temple, he was instructed not to cut the stone with any tool. You could not use a chisel or an awl to cut the stones of the temple. How was he going to cut these big, gigantic stones that built the temple? So legend, because it says in the Bible you cannot use a tool to cut the stones. So how did he do it? And anybody who's been to Israel and seen the Western Wall knows there's big stones the size of those window panes, and they're all perfectly cut and they fit in together perfectly. So if you couldn't use them, use a tool, how would you achieve something like that? So there's a fairy tale, a legend, a story of Solomon and Asmodeus, that Solomon didn't know what to do. He didn't know how to build the temple without these tools. So he thought on it, and a vision came to him in a dream, in which he was told that there's a little creature, a worm, a special worm called the shamir. And the shamir has the ability to eat through the stone and cut it and hew it in a natural way. And Solomon woke up from his dream and was like, oh, well, I have to find the shamir. And he searched high and low and asked, and after consulting with all the wise men that he could, he learned that the shamir was in the possession of Asmodeus, the king of the demons. But that Asmodeus would not be very likely to give it up to Solomon quite so easily. So Solomon went on a quest, took him far and wide to the farthest reaches of the earth until he found Asmodeus, who was living in his cave. And he asked Asmodeus for the shamir, and Asmodeus said no. So through a series of tricks, Solomon managed to trick Asmodeus into the cave, where he sealed him up. And when he sealed him up, he was able to take the shamir and go and build the holy temple in Jerusalem using this worm, the shamir, that can eat through stone and cut it in perfect ways without having to use a tool. Solomon also, after that, that wasn't the end of Solomon and Asmodeus. There's a very famous story called the Beggar King, in which I kind of mentioned it last week. Solomon was was thought to have in his possession a ring. And on that ring was the special name of God, the unpronounceable name of God. And through that ring, Solomon was able to achieve miracles that he could not have done otherwise, and also, helped him with his wisdom. So King Solomon had this ring of wisdom. And he, of course, had he built the temple. And, of course, Solomon was known to have the palace of all palaces in his day. I mean, that's common folklore, that Solomon's palace was miraculously beautiful, filled with every treasure in the world. Asmodeus came by to visit, and he and Solomon were sparring. They were talking Torah, and Solomon asked Asmodeus for the power to see visions. So Asmodeus, the next thing Solomon knew, he woke up in a desert, far away, in the middle of the desert, not knowing where he was, clothes and tattered, and he found himself having been forced into a situation where he had to wander the earth. And for many years, Solomon wandered the earth, and while he was gone, who sat on the throne in his place but Asmodeus? And while Solomon wandered the earth, he had many experiences, including marriage, losing his family to a flood, having to beg on the streets for food, experiencing illness, sorrow, poverty, and finally, after 12 years of wandering, Solomon finds himself back in Jerusalem, goes to the temple, and in an instant, he finds himself again sitting on his throne in his royal clothes. And his advisors say to him, "What was with you? You were out for an hour." And he was like, "I was out for an hour? I've been gone for 12 years. The story is that then Asmodeus came to him and said, "Now I've shown you how you really see visions, because you have to live the life of the common man, wander, experience hardship, poverty, in order to be a truly wise king." So that's one of the stories of the beggar king.
There's a famous poem, of course I don't remember who wrote it, about Ozymandias.
Asmodeus.
I understand that, but I'm saying Ozymandias. Is there
Okay.
any connection? Do you know the poem that I'm talking about?
I don't know it, but if you can find it and bring it in, I would be interested.
No.
I'd be interested. So, Asmodeus, as I said, he's the king of the demons. Oh, and I forgot to mention, by the way, who is his wife? Lilith, our friend Lilith, is married to Asmodeus. And though he brings out the evil inclination in people, and his job is to bring out, as king of the demons, is to bring out that evil inclination, it's also, the evil inclination serves a purpose in Jewish folklore, in Judaism and Jewish thinking. That without the evil inclination, how would you know what is good?
Right.
How would you know? And
If Asmodeus is the king, he did something really smart, and wise, because he sent them out to see the world and see what it's all about.
right.
That doesn't seem to jive with somebody that represents the king, of evil.
Well, kings are supposed to be wise. And like I said, like I was just saying, Asmodeus' purpose as the king of the demons is to be a foil to everything always being good. Everything is not always good in the world.
I don't know if anyone here is a fan of Star Trek, the original Star Trek.
Oh, yeah.
There was
Really?
one episode where Kirk is divided in two. He's all good and all evil.
Right.
And he can't function either way. He
Right.
must have both parts together in order to function.
And all of those Star Trek people that were
Jewish.
so
Yes.
and actually,
A lot was taken.
you can laugh about it, but a lot of plots, and in popular culture, a lot of story plots are taken from Jewish folklore, Jewish theology, Jewish ideas, and that happens to be one of them.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, Barbara is actually having trouble functioning because she's all good.
Oh.
So, but really, I mean, these are the big questions in the universe, right? It's kind of like the same thing with Kabbalah, that we don't understand. Why is there evil in the world? How could such evil as Hitler exist in this world? And so people, you know, this is long before Hitler, but people, in trying to grapple with and understand, created a mythology and a folklore which helped them to think about these things in a context that was easier to wrap your head around. It's easier to wrap your head around a fairy tale and think about the repercussions, or, oh, you know, that was really smart of Asmodeus. He got Solomon to really know what it was like and to be a wiser king because of that, you know, things like that. So the role of the demon in Jewish folklore is not to drag men into sin, which it is in Christian folklore, but it's more to make man aware of the sin and then create a balance for good. So, moving on, what time is it?
20 to 12.
Oh gosh, I always just run out of time. So now that brings us to different types of demons and ghouls and ghosts. So ghosts. Do Jewish people believe in ghosts? Are there ghosts in Judaism? Anybody know?
Well, you know, from a Sarah and Fiddler on the Roof, was a ghost. And they were really, you know, they were worried that she was not happy.
Well, Fruma Sarah wasn't exactly a ghost because she came only in Tevye's dream, right? But so she appeared in his dream. She wasn't walking around haunting. But in other Yiddish literature and in Sephardic literature, ghosts are portrayed in many, many stories, and ghosts do exist. But ghosts are portrayed more as a soul in Gehenna, in that middle place, a soul that has not been able to move on yet. And so it's not like, it doesn't necessarily have a form of, you know, the shadow or, you know, the ghostly forms that we think of, you know, with going, ooh, ghosts like that. A ghost is an unsettled soul that is still traveling in that in-between place, not alive and not in heaven. And so the ghost can't really, in Judaism, can't really harm you. And in Jewish folklore, ghosts are not thought to be, you know, malevolent, but they can create feelings of dread and of sadness, or cause a person to behave in a certain way. I saw a Yiddish play called The Inn last year down on Hester Street, and it was a story about a young couple who, the parents of the bride owned an inn, a roadside inn, and they gave that inn to the young couple when they got married as their source of livelihood. But the inn was haunted, and so everyone who came to stay in the inn, you know, felt cold, felt ill, felt, you know, it wasn't like the ghost was there going to strangle them, but it kind of had an effect which caused people to argue with each other and to not trust each other. And it wasn't until they were able to get rid of the ghost that the inn was able to function as an inn, and the young couple could be happily married. It affected their marriage. And the ghosts take that kind of form as these souls that have not been able to move on. And then in terms of the dead, Jewish folklore, a lot of times in Jewish folklore, you do see the dead in dreams. They come to you in your dreams, and usually it's someone who you love, a family member, or someone who you knew well, or you know, maybe, and that soul comes and gives you a message.
Yeah.
That's how it works, how ghosts work in Judaism. Although they're not really ghosts, they're coming to you in their dreams. It's a vision of that soul.
But there's a difference between a ghost and a spirit. A
What?
spirit is heaven, and a ghost is somebody who is on earth or in this middle place. I study this. That's for many years. So, and a ghost is, like you said, cannot harm you. If you're a certain distance away, like 25 feet, ask them to go back into the light. They go back into the light. They don't harm, but they do create mischief. But there is a distinction between a spirit and a ghost in all sorts of religions.
So tell me what a spirit is then. Is a spirit, I mean, I think what I know a spirit to be, you're right, a spirit is not a ghost. A spirit comes from a manifestation of, it's maybe an angel or a demon. It comes from the manifestation of the holy court, of God's realm. So, and just like demons, spirits could be good, they could be evil. So actually, in Judaism, there's a special spirit called an Ibor. Anybody ever hear of an Ibor? So an Ibor it's not actually a spirit, it's a soul, a reincarnation of a soul that hasn't finished its work on earth yet, or was sent down from heaven to help a person accomplish a specific task. And once that task is accomplished, the Ibor will leave. And so it's a possession, and Ibor is a possession of a soul, always benevolent. And Ibor is a benevolent possession of a soul who either impregnates your body, and they call it that, it's joined with your body, it's become part of your body, in order to help you accomplish a certain task or get something done or to have a certain understanding, or else the Ibor could potentially be coming, in possessing you, impregnating you, so that the Ibor could finish a task that it needed to finish, that soul needed to finish in a previous lifetime and did not have the chance to finish it.
Okay, you brought this up, so that's why I'm saying. What is the Jewish feeling about reincarnation? Because when you study meditation, they all believe,
Well, the
that
mystic-
you stay here until you learn what you're supposed to learn, and you come back until you learn more, and you come back until you learn
Yeah.
more. And that's what you're actually saying.
Well, actually, the mystical Jewish tradition, Kabbalah, definitely believes in reincarnation. There's a definite idea that reincarnation is just that your soul is on a journey, and that the lives that it leads are part of that journey, a learning experience. Kind of like the beggar king, right? Wandering and then coming back. I think that when in the traditional, non-mystical rabbinic thought, does not necessarily, well, I don't want to say it doesn't necessarily believe in reincarnation, because I think there is an element, even in traditional Jewish rabbinical belief, of reincarnation. That it's all about the soul, and that our bodies are the housing for the soul in this particular lifetime, but it's our soul that's the thing that really is living life that's really counting here. That's, I don't know if it's true or not, but anyway, so yes, that is. So along those same lines, we have the Ibor, which I just told you is a benevolent soul that's joins with you and leaves once whatever the goal is has been accomplished. The opposite of that is what we started with, the Dybbuk. The Dybbuk is an unsatisfied, unhappy soul that is, can't find its way, and consequently possesses a person, a living person. And in the play, and I'll see if I could show you the other clip, but I'll tell you about it first. Anybody know the plot of the play, the Dybbuk? What's the plot?
A pregnant woman, I think, or a pregnant woman who goes also to a cemetery.
Louder.
Then enters Havana, becomes like
Could you repeat what she said?
So she said a pregnant woman or a bride goes into a cemetery and visit a grave, and the soul enters her body and becomes the Dybbuk inside her. So that's kind of right. It's the story of a young woman who's in love with a young man who her father does not approve of. And she and the young man want very much to get married. And originally the father says okay, and he makes a marriage agreement. And then he reneges upon it when he gets a better offer of an older man who's wealthy, who, he thinks in his mind is a better match for his daughter. When the young man, his daughter's sweetheart, finds out about it, he takes his own life out of desperation and unhappiness that his beloved is to be married to someone else. The bride-to-be does go to the cemetery, and when she goes to the cemetery to visit, it's not quite then that she becomes possessed, but she senses that his soul has not settled down. And then at the wedding, which I just showed you that beginning clip, while she's dancing with another woman, because women dance with women, through that other woman, the Dybbuk entered, with dancing, she suddenly sees that she sees that it's in the movie, it shows like that he's a skeleton, and then it turns into the face of her beloved, and he enters her. And under the wedding canopy, she refuses to marry her intended, the guy her father wanted her to marry. And she goes berserk, screaming and hollering, and the rabbi, who's a young rabbi, performs an exorcism to relieve her of the Dybbuk. And in the end, does anybody know how it ends? And I remind you, she has to choose whether or not to live and be alive and marry the bridegroom, or to let the Dybbuk remain in her and actually perish along with the Dybbuk. So this is a whole Yiddish tragedy, it's a whole genre, but it's based upon a very real mythology, very real folkloric ideas that Dybbuks existed, and that people could fall prey to Dybbuks, and that, if you went to the cemetery, you were opening yourself up to possession. And so,
What's her choice?
What was her choice?
Yeah.
She dies.
That's all she wanted to know.
That's not it. No, have to complete
Believe
it.
that person doesn't die, that their soul lives forever when the person just dies bodily, but the soul will live forever.
That's the philosophy behind all of this.
That's Kabbalah?
That is in Kabbalah, yes. Yeah, that's part of the philosophy. She asked about reincarnation, that the body dies, but the soul lives on.
It's interesting.
Go to another child, the soul?
It is reborn again, yes. The souls are sent down from heaven to be reborn again, and that's, by the way, also where it comes from, this idea that people have a bashert. In Judaism, there's this idea that people have a bashert, which means their God-intended partner, their destined partner that heaven has chosen for them. And that comes from souls that have known each other in different lifetimes and are meant to be together, are destined to be together.
All of this is to explain, what's happening in the world and what happened years and years ago. But if you look at even the Holocaust, if you believe, because this lifetime is just a snap of the finger, it's called infinitesimal, and supposedly the big thing is the soul. So you can even explain, for whatever reason that happened, but these people that died, you don't know what happened to their souls after. And that could be the big explanation you know, of life, bad things happen to good people.
Maybe. So these are, like I said, these
Would
are
you like
all
to
the
write a
kind of
book?
questions.
Amy, would you like to write a book with me about that?
That book was your.
So, you know, this is what the supernatural does. It answers the things that we don't understand. It tries to provide explanations for things that we don't understand, and tries to make sense of the world, because there is so much of it that we just really don't know, right? So, the last piece I want to tell you about is a famous Jewish monster, which we talked about in the last class where we read books about the golem, and you have the golem legend in front of you. Now the golem has, oh, by the way, before I move on, I wanted to tell you that in terms of Dybbuk, of the idea of Dybbuk, and in thinking about popular culture, there have been many horror movies, American-made horror movies, one called The Possession, Carrie. All of these movies have come from the underlying idea that the person is possessed by a demon, a Dybbuk,
What about
multiple personalities, the bad seed, all of those things come from these ideas.
Is that it, Rosemary's Baby?
Well, Rosemary's Baby
That
was
was the
different
devil.
because that was the devil, having relations with a human woman, and the baby was his offspring. So that's a little different than a Dybbuk. But the Dybbuk theme comes up in many popular movies and books and things like that. The golem has a reputation of being a monster, and for those of you who took my book class before, anybody know what the golem was? Thoughts about a golem?
Protected the temple, the synagogue.
A golem is, he protected the synagogue. A golem is a man-made creature that was originally thought to have been, the legend originates in the 1500s in Prague with a famous rabbi whose nickname was the Maharal. And he was up against a priest named Thaddeus in Czechoslovakia in that time. And Thaddeus was very, what's the word I want? He believed in the blood libel, and that Jews killed Christians for their blood for ritual purposes and to make matzahs and for wine. And the blood libel fomented a lot of anti-Semitic rioting and pogroming against Jews in Prague in the time. And what would often happen is if there was a murder, if somebody accidentally somebody murdered somebody, they would often sneak and put the body in the Jewish quarter so that it would look like the Jews did it. And there's a story, the story goes that the Maharal was the chief rabbi, and this blood libel was going on, and it was creating a lot of problems, rioting, Jewish slaughter, and there was a rule that if one Jew committed a sin, the entire community was at fault. So that brought down punishment upon the entire Jewish community. So the Maharal went to the king and he had a conversation with him, and he convinced the king to only try a guilty person. And if one person did something wrong, it should be that person who's tried, not the entire community. And he kind of made an alliance with the king. The Maharal, the rabbi, made friends with the king. But this priest, Thaddeus, who was one of the main priests of the day, didn't go for that. And so the legend says that in the end, the Maharal, with his son-in-law and one of his disciples, created a golem, which is a man out of clay. And through magical incantations, they fashioned the body out of clay, and through magical incantations brought the body to life. And the golem had to only obey the rabbi. And they put the golem on as the protector of the synagogue. He stayed in the synagogue, but his job was to walk around the Jewish quarter at night in Prague and make sure that no Christians were bringing dead bodies to the Jewish quarter to make blood libel on the Jews. And several Christians were caught. Oh, and he also, when he did the walking around the quarter at night, they had him dressed like a Christian monk in a robe and a rope sash like a Christian monk would wear. So in that way, he protected the Jewish community from the rioting as a result of blood libels. And when finally, after a while, truce was made, Thaddeus was deposed, the king restored, kind of order and prevented blood libels, they brought the golem up to the attic of the synagogue, and they reversed the incantation, and he took the life away from him. And the legend says that he's still in the attic of that synagogue in Prague, and that he's up there buried underneath boxes and mounds of old Jewish books, like in the Geniza, which is where you store old Jewish books, and that he can be brought to life again by the right person, and his job is to protect the Jewish community. So he was in a way, he was Frankenstein, and Frankenstein is modeled on the golem.
I'm made to understand it was the only synagogue in Prague that wasn't destroyed during the war because the Christian people, they were afraid.
Yeah, so that's exactly right. That synagogue in Prague was left alone during World War II, and I had told you that the Germans were afraid of that synagogue, and what happened apparently is a German soldier went up to the attic and never came back. That's the, a Nazi went up to the attic and he didn't come back, and so the Germans became afraid of it, and in the end that synagogue was spared. So interesting story about the golem. So that's a little brief history of devils, demons, Dybbuk's, ghouls and golems, ghosts and golems. It's fun for Halloween, and also makes you think what's out there that we don't know about. What?
Said that another video.
Well, do we have time for that?
Some of us stay.
Sorry, Aaron.
All right, let me see if I can find, it's just a little bit more detailed of the golem, of the Dybbuk.